The economy is also measured in human lives, most critically in the lives of people who try to work their way up from poverty. The measure will be the focus of a conference on economic mobility that's being sponsored by the Crittenton Women's Union. We'd like to welcome, here's our guest from the union, the Vice President for Research and Innovation, Deborah Youngblood. Thank you very much for being with us, Deborah.
Thanks so much for having me.
First of all, the reason for having this conference, this is on May 1st we're talking about, what's the object?
Well, we really want to look at what works in promoting economic mobility. We know that economic mobility has diminished over the last few decades. It's harder and harder to promote it, and we really want to look at what is successful in helping people get ahead.
Anything we know about what's been going on in Massachusetts that shows some promise, at least?
Yeah. So what we do at Crittenton Women's Union is really do a combination of research and advocacy and direct services to look at what can we do for the folks around Boston who we serve to help promote economic mobility. And we look at a few different strategies that we think are promising. We look at helping people build leveraging social networks, so helping them have a bigger group of people that they can turn to that open economic opportunities for them. And we look at how to help people with making financial decisions, guidance around career, that sort of thing.
What about somebody who, let's say they're really struggling just to get a high school diploma?
Yeah. So that's the first step. And what we think of economic mobility is that it's a journey. There's not as many pathways out of poverty as there used to be, but it's a knowledge-based economy, and degrees are really required at this point if you're going to get a job that pays a family-sustaining wage. So the first step, if you don't have a high school diploma, is to get yourself into a GED program.
Now, of course, if you look beyond that, I guess maybe one thing that's a little bit encouraging is that you don't need a PhD to be successful. And sometimes even an associate's degree can be a very great help.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we look at very closely at CWU are what are the jobs that are in high demand in Massachusetts that only require a 2-year degree and that will pay a family-sustaining wage. And we try to give very concrete guidance around not only what those jobs are, but what's exactly the degree that you need to get them.
Of course, another problem is when people go to pursue those degrees, and this often means maybe going to a community college, there's a lot of attrition.
Yes. Well, it's one thing to get into a community college, and it's another thing to be successful while you're there. And for the folks that we serve, which are primarily single parents, it's a lot to juggle. To go to school, you still have to provide for your family while you're going to school. People are generally needing to go to school part-time, so it can be slow and a little bit discouraging that way. You may need to take classes that don't even give you college credit, but just remedial classes to sort of prepare you to be successful at college-level work. So there's a lot of obstacles, and there's unfortunately not as many resources and programs to support people while they're trying to be successful in school.
One other barrier that has been around for quite a while is the cost of living in Massachusetts, especially if you're close to the city of Boston.
Yes. Well, Massachusetts is one of the states with the highest cost of living. We at CWU put out the Massachusetts Economic Independence Index. It's a budget that we put out every few years of what does it cost to live in Massachusetts, just sort of a basic budget to make ends meet. And what we know from that research is that for a single parent with 2 children, it costs on average $61,000 a year just to make ends meet without any government subsidies. So that's $29 an hour. Minimum wage is $8 an hour. It's a big gap.
Of course, what's also happened is we have the widening wealth gap. We hear so much about that. But how does that make things worse for people who are trying to close the gap themselves?
Well, I think one of the things that we see, particularly in Massachusetts, is we have a population with more credentials than a lot of other states. So we have what really is in effect an education markup. You have people with bachelor's degrees that are applying for jobs that really technically only need an associate's degree or a high school diploma even. But employers are happy to take those job seekers with those higher degrees. So you end up having a lot of people who are technically overqualified for the jobs that they're holding. And it means that for the people with the least credentials, they're really not able to compete. So that makes it particularly difficult here in Massachusetts.
Talk about some of the difficult parts of the road to self-sufficiency, because what happens, you might have somebody who's heavily dependent on agency or government help. They take a step forward, they get a job, and just as they have an opportunity to take another step, they realize this is going to cost them more than they might gain from the very next step forward.
Exactly. So unfortunately, the way that a lot of our benefits are set up, that when you income out of them, so when you're no longer eligible for those benefits based on your income, what you were receiving is worth actually isn't made up by the income increase that you received. So you find yourself sort of spiraling backwards. So what we talk about at CWU a lot is needing to help people make a leap over those cliffs, so that they don't find themselves sort of feeling like, oh, I don't want to get that $2 an hour raise because it's just going to make my life harder, but instead getting enough education and enough training and enough work experience so that they can get a job that really provides that sort of leap over those cliff effects, as we call them.
This sounds like you need some advice from that network of connections too. Not just help getting a job, but,
yes,
but deciding what to do next.
You do, and one of the things that we're piloting is a platform of deep engagement, long-term engagement with people. We call it mobility mentoring. So it's 5 years of providing that kind of holistic guidance around how do you make those decisions, what are the resources that you need, where do you turn at sort of each step of the way, because it's not a clear-cut path. You can't just kind of point people in the right direction and say go. There's a lot of decisions to be made along the way, and so sort of giving people that guidance. And we think that if we sort of do that upfront investment, that over the long term there'll be a lot of savings in government subsidies.
So we have a little bit of time just for a reminder
Sure.
about the conference coming up on the 1st of May.
Yes, so it's May 1st at Simmons College. It's called Disrupting the Poverty Cycle. We have people coming in from around the country, going to be looking at what works, what are the solutions to promote economic mobility in this country.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From the Crittenton Women's Union, Deborah Youngblood.